On the last video on our channel you have seen the perfect mini ramp we built in our backyard. And in today's video we're going to show you how we build it. We have quite a lot of ground to cover, so I will put timestamps in the description if you want to jump into certain part of the video. I will start with the plans and drawings, how I designed the ramp and why it is like it is. Then I will talk a little bit about the materials and how much money did I spend on what. We will talk about how to prepare the plywood and other material, what tools did we use. We will talk a little bit about the foundation and then just continue into assembly, how we assemble the skeleton, all the quarter pipes, how we install the coping and everything about the plywood and finish. So stay tuned and let's go for the plans and drawings. Because there is a lot to talk about the build of this ramp, I will probably forget to tell some things. And if you have questions, ask them down in the comments below. I always reply to the comments on my video. So this is my plan of my ramp. You can make your plan with pen and paper or any other application. I use Autodesk Fusion 360 just because I'm familiar with this application and I use it for other activities and projects as well. If you want your ramp to be sturdy and stiff and last for many years, you will need to have a total of 18 millimeters of plywood covering the entire surface. So 18 millimeters here, 18 millimeters on the flat part and 18 millimeters on the platforms. The platforms can be of different size, and actually in reality I have one platform bigger than the other, and I actually have even a bench made here as you saw in the video. These you can add on, so you can see that this ramp ends here and that platform is just an add-on which you can change to whatever size you like. So I'll just stick to the basics right now. So how do you put 18 millimeters of plywood? Well, before you add any plywood on your mini ramp, you will have several decisions to be made. So first of all, you will need to decide how tall your mini ramp will be, what will be the transition radius, and also how wide you want your mini ramp to be. So my mini ramp is made to be pretty soft when you drop in. It's not intimidating. It doesn't have any vertical transition right here, as you can see. And the circle radius is 2.2 meters. If you want your transition to be nice and soft, your transition radius will have to be more or less above 2 meters. 2.2 meter transition radius is the ramp that everyone can ride. Beginners don't find it scary. I also myself, I pretty much enjoy it. I know that some of you would like to have it vertical, but then you will have to increase your height of the ramp a lot or go for a much smaller radius. So if you go with a smaller radius, you know, then you can make this ramp work, but you have very steep transition. So when you define the height and the transition radius, then you can start thinking about how wide your ramp will be. The width of my ramp has been defined by the materials. I could get these in 2.4 meters long. I could actually got them longer, but I think this is reaching the limit of how wide you can go without making the ramp too weak or buying these much thicker, which would increase the price of the ramp a lot. And also the dimensions of the plywood. So the width of the plywood is around 1/220, so two pieces make it 2/440, and this is 240, and this is exactly how I decided how wide my ramp would be. One thing to remember when you plan for the width of the ramp and you calculate, you know, the material sizes, that there are actually fluctuations in the plywood size and also in every other material. Another thing to mention, don't forget that the last layer, the final layer of the plywood, will have to cover also the walls. The walls for the transition for my ramp are built out of 15 millimeters of plywood. So you will have two sections, you know, of 15 millimeter for every quarter pipe. So you need to add 30 extra millimeters overlap to be sure that your width of the plywood of the final layer is sufficient and you don't have like 15 millimeter gap at the end. Alright, so by now you have decided how wide is your mini ramp, how tall it is, and what is the transition radius. Now the next question you need to answer for yourself, how many of these horizontal planks you will need. So you will definitely need one at the end, at the bottom for every quarter pipe. You will also need one at the other end right here where the transition ends, flush at the very end. And then we installed actually one in every 20 centimeters, 200 millimeters between the centers of every plank, both here on transition and also on the flat part right here. So you might notice that there are some extra planks on the flat part right here and right here, and these were installed actually during the build of the ramp. I didn't actually have them in my plans, and we had to install them because this was the place where our plywood was overlapping. So the sheet of plywood was coming down from the transition, and this is where it was ending. So we had to add something to put the screws in to fix the plywood, the end of the plywood in place. This was bad planning by me, just because I didn't know how will we install the plywood, but something to be mindful about. Now let's go back to the topic of installing plywood and 18 millimeters of plywood. As you might be able to see already, that all of these horizontal planks are installed 12 millimeters lower than the wall of the transition. Why not 18? Because the last layer of plywood will be going over the wall, and the first two layers or one layer of 12 millimeter will go here. Now for all of the parts that are flat and you don't need to bend plywood, we use 12 millimeter plywood, which then makes it flush to the wall. So for example, if I just add the plywood, you will see that we have 12 millimeter plywood plate just sitting here on the horizontal plank. And the same happens here on the flat part. You can see that we have it sitting here, and then it's actually flush to the wall. Now on all the transitions, as you can see already, we actually use only 6 millimeter of plywood, just because it's so much easier to bend it than the 12 millimeter one. And this is what I would recommend you to do as well, to go with 6 millimeters and 6 millimeters here, making it 12 and making it flush. Now when we actually installed it in reality, we encountered a problem because our plywood was not exactly 6 millimeters. We didn't measure it before we started the installation. It was actually 5.5 only. So we had this wall sticking out around 1 millimeter, and we couldn't add the top wall. We had to sand it all down with the angle grinder. Yeah, so if that happens, you need to make sure that it's flush. Maybe it's less of a problem here at the edges, but definitely a big problem here in the middle, because if you add your final layer of plywood and something is sticking out here in the middle, it won't be good. You will have it, you will probably break the plywood. So all in all, you will have like 2 times 6 millimeter plywood here, and as you can see, I actually used 1, 2, 3, 4 plates 2 times on the quarter pipes, and 12 millimeter plywood here as the first layer, and also on the platforms 12 millimeter layer of plywood. And then for the top ply, we used again 6 millimeter hardwood plywood, and we started laying it down here in the middle, just like you see right here, really trying to make the first one centered in the middle and also make it flush one with each other, because the more skewed you will put the first ones, the more they will go sideways on the final ones. So we installed it like this, and then these were like full pieces of the full sheets of the plywood, and then all of the ones that went top here and on the sides had to be cut. And it's important that you actually do that, because as you can see, this plywood is, the joint of the plywood is here, and this one is overlapping it. So you have to overlap it both in length and in width to make a strong structure when you build your ramp. So right now we are looking at the list of materials that I used to build this ramp, and also immediately jump to the pretty much most common question: how much did that ramp cost? So all in all, I didn't have to pay anything for the tools, and I didn't have to pay anything for the work. It cost me around 3,500 euros. I live in Denmark, where everything is extremely expensive due to very big taxes. I believe that anywhere else in Europe, and even more so anywhere else in the world, you can build it much cheaper. The materials are really expensive here, but you need to make your own list, make your own shopping cart on the online somewhere, and make an estimate. After you have a plan, it's not such a big deal. I was actually expecting to finished the ramp for 22,000 kronas, and I spent extra 4,000 on unexpected things, you know, which I will cover a bit later. But so this is the key list of the materials. The horizontal planks that I used were 95 by 47 millimeters. One important thing to mention that these horizontal planks need to be vacuum impregnated with an agent. They need to be water resistant, and they will last much longer, especially in wet climates. And they were 240 centimeters long, 2.4 meters long. And I have to use 60 pieces of them. So I had a plan to use the smaller ones for the flat part. Let me just get back into the drawing. Because we made these side walls smaller, I was expecting that I can use smaller horizontal ones here, but actually I ended up using all of them in the same size, 94 by 47. I just had to lift up the side wall a little bit so that the planks were sticking out like this, and my ramp is now standing on them, on the foundation, instead of sitting on the wall. So you would see all of them right here, just because I actually use 94 by 47 or by 50, you can find them, all 110 pieces. Now I also added extra 26 pieces here, which I use for the fencing. And you can see the fencing in my video, you know, and also for the extension of platform. So all of this fencing, you know, and the platform, and this platform is, by the way, 1.2 meters wide, and also the little bench. If you want to build those, you will need some extra, but so I had to order extra 26 pieces. Actually, we used all of them, and I would probably use 2 more when I think right now, just because I would need some extra one here right now, which doesn't exist. Let's continue on the material list. You will need 6mm plywood. This is the standard size, at least in Europe, which you can get. And I put like any plywood because you need 16 pieces for the first and second layer on the transitions. And it can be any plywood which is 6mm. And the same with 12mm plywood, you know, so you will use it 4 plates, 1, 2, 3, 4 right here. And I use a couple more plates for the platforms on the top. So you will need at least 6 pieces. The next, number 6, is 6mm hardwood plywood. So this is the plywood, you know, that you can maybe opt out and use a skate light, which will last longer and be stronger and so on. But skate light costs like, I don't know, 10 times the plywood. So to cover, you know, to take like 14 pieces of skate light to cover this ramp would cost me another 2,500 euros or 3,000 euros. So it's like half price of the ramp. And that's why I just went for a hardwood plywood, which is called waterproof plywood because the glue is actually water resistant. So the glue is not affected by the water, and also the surface is hard, so it can be birch or it can be any other wood, hardwood plywood that will last longer than normal pine one, which is the cheapest one. Now for the screws, I am actually not sure about the number of the screws right here. I had to actually go out and buy a little bit more of the long ones, 5 by 120. You want them to be wood screws, and they need to be rated for outdoor use, so they don't have to be stainless steel, but they have to be rust proof. And plywood screws, yeah, we can quickly estimate right now. So I just quickly made a mock-up of one plate, which is 2 for 40 and 1 220. And I put the lines every 200mm, every 20 centimeter. So we can quickly estimate, you know, we have 1, 2, 13 by 7. You will need around 91 screw per one top plate. You know that we know that on the top surface we will have like 16 plates, so you will need 1450 screws. So actually when I put this estimate of 1500 here, I think I will add and make a bit more, because you will need some of them for the base layers of the plywood, and you will also need some for the platforms, so better be on the safe side. You actually will need more. And also here I believe that you will actually use more screws, especially if you are building the fencing around and the platform. If you're not building platform, 500 might be enough. Alright, and then of course you will need some coping. I needed 2 pieces of 4880, that's the width of my ramp. It's a 50 millimeter in diameter, and you need them for, you know, both sides of your ramp. One for this side and one for that side. So this is more or less the material list that you need. And the last one but not least is the paint. I painted my ramp with something called Gory 502. It's a water-based paint, but that has some oil, and it's a transparent one. It shouldn't make the film on the top. But I actually painted the ramp 3 times. I don't want to recommend the paint that I used just because it made my ramp a little bit slippery, a little bit more slippery than I want. I need to use the most grippiest wheels I can, and it's still a little bit sketchy. And this is the reason why I just don't know what is the best paint to use. If you use something like complete oil paint, which makes a film on the ramp, it will be super slippery to skate. So that's something to consider, that's something to experiment with. Maybe just you don't need 3 layers of paint, maybe 1 layer is sufficient, because 1 layer makes the paint pretty rough. 3 layers makes the paint pretty slippery. So that's the list of materials, guys. But it actually isn't, because I didn't include the plywood that you need for the transitions to cut these sections here. So you will need 1, 2, 3, 4 and 4 on the other side. You will need 8 transitions to cut out of the 15 millimeter laminated water resistant plywood. So this is completely different plywood. It's also thicker. Needs to be 15 millimeter, as I said, and it's completely water resistant. Also, you will need some for the sides. Now, how much do you need of it will depend completely on what size of ramp you are building. This is one standard plate or one standard sheet of plywood. If you make a smaller ramp, you might actually cut 2 transitions out of one plate. If you make a bigger one, you will probably need the entire sheet for one and then some extra for the sides.
I will need some bricks for leveling the ramp, something like these in my car, and I got them completely for free, and the only condition is that I have to haul them all the way. I just got home and found this little package waiting for me.
Do not underestimate the amount of materials that you will need for a ramp of size like this. It's quite a lot, it takes some space and it takes some effort to carry it from place to another place. So get some help if you can, or you know, just don't think that you can just order everything one day and start building or have it all placed the next day, because I was quite surprised by the amount of materials when they all have arrived.
Alright, so this is how my workshop looks now. And it's only half, not even half of the plates. I need to paint from both sides. And of course my garage.
Painting all that plywood 2 times from both sides takes tremendous amount of time, and you will need tremendous amount of space to dry it, unless you live in a very sunny place and you can just do it outside. As you know, we live in Denmark, where the weather conditions are, let's say, a little bit more wet. And I'm super happy that I had this big workshop, so I could paint all the plywood with the roller in the horizontal position and then just store them for drying vertically. When they dry out, I flip them, paint them all again and stand them up. Painting them in this way took me about a week to have 2 layers of paint covering all the plywood before the assembly.
I honestly believe this is the hardest part of building the ramp. To paint all the plates 4 times or 2 times from both sides. Oh my god. 6 days. Done. Now wash all the stuff.
If you have already decided about the length of your horizontal planks, meaning the width of the ramp, you can pre-cut the planks. Mine were ordered as 240 centimeter long ones, and they came in 243, 244. So I had to cut them in 240 one by one. And the last but not least step is to actually cut out the transitions for the side panels for the quarter pipes. I got mine CNC cut in the factory and also holes pre-drilled there, so I cannot give you any advice on how to do it or any tips. I just purchased them pre-cut, and when you finish with cutting your transitions, you're good to go and start building your ramp. We used quite a bit of tools for building this ramp. First of all, you will need a saw for cutting the horizontal planks. You will need something like a circular saw for cutting the plywood. We also used a couple of electric screwdrivers, and of course don't forget to get the Torx bits for them. You need a drill with bits, with a bit for countersinking the screws. You will need things like carpenter's pencil, wooden meter stick, measuring tape. A rubber mallet is very useful for getting the plywood in the position. You will need long level for leveling the foundation for your ramp. You will need chalk line, colored thread, maybe some clamps. On top of these essential tools, we also used a welding machine for installing coping. We also used angle grinder, fine cutter, and a shovel. There is one more tool which is necessary to make yourself. It will make your life so much easier when installing the horizontal planks.
Special tool, just place it here and make sure that we get the 12 millimeters that we need here to put the top layer, the platform in. And we use this one, just make it flush with the back edge.
You can say that's a simple Z shape. You just have to make sure that the longest part of this tool is 12 millimeters longer than the height of your horizontal plank. This will make installing the horizontal planks at the same level so much easier than just trying and measure it every time with each and every one of them. Foundation of the ramp serves two purposes. First of all, it gives you an even ground to place your ramp and make sure that it's straight. And the second one, it lifts the ramp up from the ground, allowing the wood to breathe and not rot standing on the grass or any other surface. Now, if you look at our foundation, that's basically some concrete tiles or bricks or whatever you like to call them. And you might already notice something, that on the left side of the ramp, the brick is taller than on the right side. So in actual fact, it's a 4 centimeter difference that we intentionally built in when building the ramp, to make sure that the water is not standing on the ramp here, so that there is no big pool or a puddle in the middle. And when it's raining, the water will all go down to the right side. And yes, it means that coping also going a little bit down, 4 centimeters difference. So it's a bit easier to grind to the right side if you go from this side of the ramp, and a bit easier to grind to the left side if you go from this side of the ramp. For ramp, we aim to have 4 points for every quarter pipe. Then of course 2 quarter pipes that are next to each other would share the ones in the middle, and also they would share, and the front ones would also share the same bricks or tiles with the flat part. And of course we put some extra support for the middle of the flat part. So the amount of tiles can be different depending on the height of your tiles and how high you want your ramp to be, but you need to support at least every corner of the quarter pipe, every corner of the flat part, and if the flat part is long, you also need something in the middle. You can see that Alan is using the bright colored thread to make sure that all the bricks are lined up in one line. So you choose your first corner of the ramp, lay down some bricks, and then make sure that they are straight. The next step is to try and level the ramp with this mentioned 4 centimeter difference. So for that we need to use the long level. If the tile is too low or too high, we would dig with a shovel or just add some soil and try to make it to the level that we need. And continue going through different corners, making sure that all the tiles are aligned and on the same height as we need. If you have your materials ready and you have level surface to begin with, you can just start by connecting the first horizontal plank with the bottom rear corner of the first transition. After you do that on both sides, you can start preparing your screws. Just put the screw in every hole which was pre-drilled in the transition and get ready to add the horizontal planks. This is where the self-made Z tool is just so comfortable to use. It takes no time, you just put the tool on the transition wall, put the plank on it and screw it. I would recommend being 2 people with 2 electric screwdrivers. That will increase your speed dramatically. You continue in the same manner until you build all your 4 quarter pipes, and you do the same with 2 flat parts. Just don't rush to connect it all together. As you can see now in the footage where the Alan is standing, we have connected first quarter pipe to the first flat part to the second quarter pipe. But we do not connect the quarter pipes that will stand next to them, and we do not connect the flat part that will stand next to them. I found that building skeleton is the most satisfying part of the ramp build because the progress is very quick, you can see the result immediately, it's not hard and it's a great fun. The reason not to install the flat part or the coping that is next to the first flat part is because you want to install these 2 sheets of plywood first. And then you might need to actually loosen the bolts of the side of the flat part, so you can actually screw them back together and squeeze the plywood so there is no gap in between. After the first flat parts of plywood are installed, you can continue and join all the quarter pipes and flat parts together into one big piece. We actually even added some sheets of plywood because we didn't have coping on the day 1 of assembly of the ramp, but I would recommend against that. When you finished putting all the skeleton together, now it's time to install the coping. Now the key reason why I recommend first installing the coping before any plywood is because before installing the coping you actually need to check if your ramp is still straight, and if it's not you need to correct, and we actually had to do that. Remember all that dirt that we used for leveling the tiles? Now it's settled down over the night and also because of the weight of the ramp, and we noticed that some parts of the ramp are not even and we couldn't actually install the coping because we had this huge gap in the middle. So we had to lift the middle of the ramp, one corner, other corner, and make it all straight again.
Alright, so one small complication that we have is these ones. We have to cut it at an angle here because otherwise the coping won't be flush. And we want to weld the little metal plates on the coping. So we have to cut this at an angle. So that's one of unexpected things, at least for me.
There are at least million ways to install the coping on a quarter pipe, but we decided to stick with welding on metal plates and connecting them to the plank. We had to have this plank, which is at the bottom where I'm holding my finger on, underneath the coping all the way so that it doesn't bend when you grind it. It's super important to have something supporting the coping from the bottom.
But I think that it works pretty well, so we installed these 2 to hold the coping just around here with some metal plates. Should be nice and strong.
Today, after skating this ramp for more than 10 times, I can confirm that coping is really solid, it stays in place, it's rigid and it's fine. Welding these plates on avoids you from drilling the hose through the coping, and also welding the end caps ensures that there is no water getting in, it's protected from corrosion and from the wind noise.
Don't stop now.
If you want to have the slickest possible coping for grinds, give it a spray with some varnish. It will make sure that the coping is really slippery even without waxing. And now when the coping is installed and you can actually measure distances from the coping to the next plate of plywood, you can start installing the plies. The sequence in which we installed the plywood was: first we installed the 12mm plates on the flat part, starting from the middle and going to the outside. And then the same starting in the middle and going to the outside for the quarter pipes. Measure a couple of times before you cut, and use the factory cut side to put the first plate against the transition wall, and use the cut sides to put together one with each other. Don't forget to add a little bit of paint on the cut side of the plywood. If the fit is a little bit tight, you can loosen up the bolts on the transition side and squeeze the plywood in. The screw heads on the sides of the transitions will be the best marker to set up your chalk line and mark out where are your horizontal planks. Remember that for the first layers of plywood, you just need a couple of screws to hold them in place. because when you add the last layer of plywood, you will be screwing through all these layers of plywood, and it will be many more screws. At the same time, it's a good idea to leave a little bit of a gap from the edges of the ramp, because that's where you will be screwing the last layer of your plywood. You might find it a little bit hard to stand on the quarter pipes when screwing in the plywood, so just attach a couple of planks on the mini ramp and you have where to stand. Use a special drill bit to countersink the heads of the screws so they don't stick out, and also you don't break the top layer of the plywood into splinters. Also, instead of measuring the distance between every hole, you can just make yourself a little template from the scrap of plywood of the length that you need, and that will help you space the screws more evenly on the top layer. After spending some hours of adding all the screws on the top layer, I painted the top surface of the mini ramp for the third time, and as I told you before, my ramp became a little bit too slippery, so I don't know if I should recommend doing that or not. I know that it's really water resistant now, but a little bit too slippery. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Drop your questions down in the comments below, and I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers, bye!